how to prioritize self-care in your life. Because when you're on this journey of going through just trying to get pregnant or deciding if you want children, period, sometimes self-care gets put to the side because you get dialed in. And then you go down a road like you've been down. And that can even be more of the case sometimes because you get so invested. But self-care is what you need more than anything, just to take care of yourself. So talk to me about your journey with that.
Well, I think self-care is probably one of the things that people talk about being important to them, but struggle the most finding out how to incorporate it in their lives. Yeah. And I'll be the first, person to raise my hand to say that it's definitely a daily journey that I try to take myself through, because self-care, we often, especially as females, associate taking care of ourselves as being selfish. And selfishness being something that we should not be, and that we should be taking care of others before we take care of ourselves. So the path of self-care for me is really a deliberate one, and one that I wake up and do my best to focus on how I want to feel for the day. Because the minute you put your feet on the floor and the phone starts ringing and, this one needs that and work is calling about this and your mom needs, you to pick up something for the present for somebody on your way home from work, and all of it seems to go out. So I think it's really important to schedule your time ahead of time and the things that are important to you for your self-care, and have that be a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And decide, is it 15 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? Is it an hour long, class at Orange Theory or something like that? And know that regardless of what happens throughout the day, that's something that you're going to honor for yourself. So I think scheduling it out and knowing when you wake up in the morning, how it is that you're going to feel, knowing that you have created that time for yourself.
Yeah. And also, if it's in your schedule, you're not frantic about figuring out where it fits in. You've already saved a place for it. And so that takes away that stress too.
Do the workaround and be like, okay, all these things added to my schedule, but I already know I'm signed up for that 4:00 class, or I'm going to do a meditation at this time. And then it gives you the ability to kind of work around that. Exactly. But if you see it as not necessarily, I don't even want to say a luxury, but something that is a non-negotiable, it's much easier to show up for yourself and offer yourself those things that you need.
Yeah, we have to quit seeing it as something extra we do. And we have to start seeing it as a necessity rather than being extra. Because if we treat it as extra, eventually we'll hit a wall and it will become a necessity for better or for worse. So yeah, thank you for that. Those are great examples there. Thank you so much on that. Confidently setting boundaries. I would imagine this is something that has had to come up in terms of not only just in your journey with what we're talking about today in the infertility, but just in general, that what you will and won't allow in your space, conversations you will and won't entertain, questions you will and won't ask, how you will and won't spend your time. So talk to me about your boundaries journey and how that's evolved.
Well, boundaries, to me, some people might be surprised to hear this. I don't really have a lot of boundaries. And a lot of that has stemmed from understanding what it is I believe about myself and my story and what I've been able to accomplish through my journey. And of course, boundaries are important if there's physical harm, if there's emotional turmoil that someone is going through, because someone might not have been exposed to the work and the tools that I've been through to get to this point. So I want to definitely respect the fact that if you feel that a boundary is important for you, absolutely, I would never talk anyone out of it. But when I talk about myself from this vantage point of the work that I've done on myself and to create the life that I love, I've become very clear about what it is I'm thinking about me when somebody asks, do you have kids? And that might seem like a very benign question, but it seems to be this icebreaker question. And I bring it up because it's something that's so common in the infertility community as a trigger to women when they go to a networking event, they meet someone new in the office or run into a friend on the street that they haven't seen since high school. So how many kids do you have? And through the work that I've done and I teach my students to do, I think about, well, what is going through your mind when somebody asks you that question that would rattle you? And most commonly, it's that you feel less than. You might feel like, oh, I don't fit in, or these people, might think that something's wrong with me. And so when you get clear on understanding that you tried all that you could, that you chose this path, knowing that you're proud of who you are and who you showed up as during your journey, those type of questions to me don't need to be off the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the boundaries,
I really like that.
Yeah. So the boundaries, of course, just to reiterate, a boundary should always be in place if you feel physically at harm or emotionally at harm by somebody. But I feel so much more liberated and clear-minded because I know that I'm clear on what I think about myself versus worrying about somebody else's judgment of me or the journey that I've been on.
I love that. Yeah, you've done the work you understand your value. You understand your value, and it's not determined or swayed by someone else's opinion, thought, question, those kinds of things. And that's so important. It serves so well for across the board. Like when you go through different seasons and you go through different shifts, you're not going to be rocked because you are solid in who you are and comfortable in that. And that's an incredible, and it's a tough way to get through the road you've had to go. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. At the same time, you are so much better off than so many women because you've done this work and you're so comfortable in your own skin and you understand the value of you.
The thing that I think is so important and why I talk about that, some people might think of me as being aloof or not caring or compassionate, which is totally not true. But when it comes to me and my value system of who I am, I'm very settled in that. And of course, I care what people think of me. And of course, just like any human, you want people to like you and feel connected to you. But I think that there's a graceful way you can be confident in who you are and maybe take in someone's suggestion if somebody maybe has a judgment of you or wants to offer you a different perspective that isn't currently within your realm of what you're working on, and deciding, look, you know what, maybe I want to add more of that. So I also think it's knowing that you're ever evolving. And when somebody has a judgment or says something to you, noticing like, why does that bother me? Or why is that not sitting well with me? And knowing that it's up to you to digest through that instead of taking everybody's judgments and comments and beliefs about you and your journey as the holy grail.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much because you brought up a really good point that is so important. If we're going to, and it just goes to the embracing layers piece again. If we're going to get to a place where we value and love ourselves and can embrace all those layers, we don't have to love them all, but we just embrace them, accept them as part of our story. We have to do the work. And it's hard. You got to sit in some hard stuff, but you get to the root of those things and you figure out why it's triggering. And then you're not held hostage by other people's comments, opinions, expectations. You're free because you've done the work to understand what needs to be healed, what needs to be talked about, dealt with, worked through. So I love the way you approach that. I think that's really, really such a good example. Taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health. This is very emotionally traumatizing. What happens on these journeys and when we go through these things physically, and especially when it comes around something like parenthood, where there's just you and I were talking beforehand, where we kind of just grow up thinking, if I want to be a mom, I'll be a mom. And we don't really put a lot, because one, nobody talks to you about it. When you're a kid, and nobody talks to you about it in sex ed class. No one goes into all the possibilities that could actually happen and give you any kind of toolbox or idea or education on resources that are available across the board if things don't go exactly the way, we are led to believe they will go. And so talk to me about just taking care of your emotional health and physical health in that context.
Well, I think there's probably two different answers to that question, because when you're going through fertility treatments and even rewind and start with finding out that you need reproductive assistance.
Yeah.
That, to me was probably like the biggest blow in my ego, because up until I got my diagnosis of unexplained infertility, I was 37, and I always was a very goal-driven person. And I was one of those people that would set goals and I would figure out the pathway to achieve them. So there was this realization that I actually needed help with something that most people just naturally do, or something that I had avoided doing, most of my adult life, was getting pregnant. And to be at this point where you're like, oh gosh, like, why did I do that? Should I not have done that? Should I have tried sooner? Should I have married that guy who I knew wasn't the right person for me, but I was dating when I was 22 because my chances would have been better? So there was a lot of self-judgment and a lot of self-doubt, I think, that went into even getting that diagnosis and putting it on yourself as having done something wrong.
Yeah, we do that so much, don't we? Oh my gosh.
Yes. And, should I have done this differently? Should I, have not been so focused on my career, or just all these things that we point at ourselves. And if there's more education, like you said, in sex ed, of course, there's a strong understanding that needs to go along with, the reproductive part of being a blossoming teenager. But let's talk about if that doesn't happen for you. And that's why I like to tell my story, because I think about the elementary and middle school version of me who hung her hopes on becoming a mom and just thought that was part of being a complete woman. And when that didn't happen for me, and I had never heard that narrative of a woman who still went on to do amazing things, I felt like I was very much trapped in this life that was never going to be a goal-driven, accelerating life anymore. I just thought that I was going to be at this point where I always needed help and was always the worst case scenario, or the one that people felt sorry for. Yeah. So I've seen myself kind of take that journey in a different way. And instead of attaching my value to whether my body could produce a biological child of my own, but to recognize if it didn't produce a child, what else is available for me? And there's got to be this belief that there's more for you, because there's no path that is ever going to feel plentiful and feel vivacious if there's always a thought that you have this missing piece of you. Yeah. So it's what propelled me to then go on and be like, okay, what is possible if motherhood isn't my route, instead of looking at that as something that I was disappointed and shameful of for so much of my life. So I got a little bit off topic there for you, but I think it's really
that was really good.
I think it's really just important to recognize that you didn't do anything wrong, that we need to see more examples of women who go on to thrive and be fulfilled, even though they didn't have the children they dreamed of. And of course, we've got beautiful examples like Oprah, Jennifer Aniston. I'm thinking like off the top of my head of these Chelsea Handler, or, these women who don't have children, but have these seemingly accelerated lives. But what about those of us that are like this married couple who really wanted to have kids, or a woman who never found the partner that she wanted to have the child with? And she's, sitting there thinking like, my life's always going to be at 80%, and I'm not an 80% kind of gal. Yeah.
You bring up such a good point. And I think this is the problem with the narrative around women and children that has to be talked about and has to be changed. If you decide to be a mother, whether it works out for you or it's the route you choose or not, some people decide that's not for them. That's not they don't go through all that you've been through. They just decide either way, we have to quit placing women's value based on whether they can be a mom or not, whether they can have children or not. There's so much more to women than that. That's not a missing piece. It's a choice. No one does that to a man. No one's like, oh, he's missing something. He didn't get to be a dad. There's just aren't those conversations out there happening. It's not the same standard. And so we have to change that narrative. We've got to get women and create safe spaces in society where instead of assuming and having these judgments or opinions about women that do or don't have children, whether it's by choice or they can't or whatnot, that there's a value shift. This is not a value shift. They're not any less valuable. There's every bit as valuable and beautiful with every bit as much of possibility to contribute to society as anyone else. It's just going to look different. And that's okay too, because they're going to have capacity to do things that people that are moms don't have to do where they're needed. So I feel so strongly about this for a lot of reasons. For one, I know women who have gone down this road and I've watched them rack their bodies, rack their brains, because I think the other conversation that doesn't happen is when the doctors are subscribing the 16-year-old birth control, there's no conversation about the effects this might have on you down the road. You ought to know that this is a possibility. If you make these decisions or decide to use this effort. Also, let's look at what's actually going on with their bodies and not just assume that, for one thing, a lot of girls at 16, I know this because I tried to do it to my daughters and they tried to do it to me, or put them on for period control, for acne. Let's get to the root of the problem first. But let's also talk to and educate people and let them know what the possibilities are upfront about those things as well. But also I went down a rabbit hole, but it really fires me up, this value thing that has been placed on women based whether they decide and the amount of, and I'll tell you, it's not just, there are women out there that are very opinionated and judgmental about it, and that's not okay. And if you're one of those women that has an opinion or judgment about an experience you've never had, then I want you to sit with that and ask yourself, where is that rooted in? Where is that coming from? Why do I feel so compelled? And why do I feel like it's okay for me to comment on things I have no idea about and aren't really my business?
I was going to sprinkle in there too. I never knew the difference between someone who was child-free and childless until I became part of this community. So child-free is commonly somebody who's either chosen that route or, maybe they try to become a parent and they didn't work out and they feel child-free. So like free of the decision to become without children. And then childless is usually an indication that they had wanted to be a parent at some point in their life and they're kind of working through their process. So I still proudly call myself childless because there's always going to be moments in my life where I remember standing at the counter at the grocery store waiting, for the meat and cheese counter. And this mom was putting this little piggy on the toes of her baby in a carriage. And I had to, look away with tears in my eyes because I saw, just what a beautiful bond that was for her to have that with her child. And even though I feel very much liberated from the journey that I went on and what I went through, there's always going to be moments where I know that I won't have that bond that some people have. And just like some people will never know maybe the bond that I have with my partner or with my husband. I'm married to a man named Jack, and sometimes I'll say partner, sometimes I'll say husband, but that's one and the same. And there's some people that just never will know some of the beauties that I get to experience in my life. So I proudly call myself childless because I want to represent the women who are seeking to create this life that they still feel very proud of who they are and can still consider themselves having wanted to be moms at one point in their life.
Yeah, I love that you've explained that, because I don't think people always necessarily understand there's two definitions and there's a difference in those definitions. And it's a journey on where people fall within that. And also that you can live a life of abundance in a multitude of ways. And that looks different for everybody. And so thank you for sharing that. That's really good. I think that's helpful. But again, it goes back to, the more information we can share about these things and educate people about what's available out there, what the language is around it, what's, respectful, and just hearing somebody's experience. So when you stop and think next time about what you say or don't say, or how you show up for a friend in this situation, or if you're in the situation that you're not alone. But I love such great examples there. And I think your journey is an example of how you've been able to get to a space, emotional health space, where you are feeling good and you are feeling healthful, but also being honest about the fact doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean there's not a day, but it doesn't, I've worked to a point where I'm so firm in my value that I also, that wasn't my path. And so I think that's really powerful. Thank you for that. And thank you for putting up with my passionate rant, because I'm so passionate about women knowing their value regardless. And this is one of those areas that is just really, because I grew up in an environment where women were expected to have children. And I saw women who struggled with it just absolutely take a beating. And you spoke so clearly earlier how we're so hard on ourselves about it. We blame ourselves irrationally for things that can't possibly be our fault. I mean, you make the best decisions with the information you have. So thank you for all of that. So good.
I wanted to just, if I can add on to that, like even this feeling like I disappointed my husband, that I took away the ability for him to be a father. And I carried a lot of guilt about that, although he never once made me feel as though it was my fault. And then my in-laws, like his parents don't have grandchildren. So for me, I was like their last hope, because his two other siblings were in coupled relationships, and parenthood wasn't part of their interest. So why was I the one who thought like I was supposed to come in and be the savior when there's two other siblings that chose not to have children? And I felt a lot of guilt that they were hopeful to become grandparents when we got married, because we were the last ones of their kids to get married. And I carried a lot of guilt about that. Like I was disappointing them, and I took away this title that they were entitled to.
So how did you work through that? Do you mind talking to me a little bit about that?
I worked through it, honestly, through talking about it on my podcast. My father-in-law, by the time my podcast came out, which was 2021, my mother-in-law had passed away, so she never heard one of the episodes. But my father-in-law listens to it every week religiously. He's such a sweetheart. But after that episode, it was, I want to say, my second episode, he texted me and he said, we'll never be disappointed with you. And I knew right away that he meant, he heard the episode. And I think I knew then, like, if he wasn't upset with me or he wasn't feeling that, maybe it was my time to pay attention to why I was believing that if it wasn't true.
Yeah.
And then with my husband, we never had like a full out like conversation about it, but it's just seeing how our relationship has transformed even through our journey during, and like the support that he gave me and the constant encouragement he gave me. And then to see how our relationship has even strengthened greater since we found out we couldn't become parents. I decided too that it is, it's something that I was believing that maybe just wasn't true, but I had always thought that that's what women do when they can't give something. They feel guilt. They feel like they let people down, that, they're being judged by society. And that's like the greatest freedom to know that you can let go of that.
Yeah.
Just by noticing what you're thinking.
Right. Because I think so many times we attach truth to thoughts or narratives that we have, and we automatically, it's a thought or narrative, it must be true. And taking the time to dismantle what's actually true and what isn't is so important. Yeah. You're doing this, and I think it's beautiful how you're showing up and how you've created your podcast. It's called the So Now What podcast, and we'll have that information on our website on embracinglayers.com in the resources section. you mentioned that as a tool of healing, but you also, I think it's really how you have shown up in this next talking point and how we can support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically. So talk to me about that.
Well, I think it's important to understand the story that you tell people about you. And I never knew that I could have ownership in my story. I took a lot of like what I believed about myself. And when I would see those people, like we talked about earlier, that I hadn't seen in a long time, or someone who maybe knew I had gone through fertility treatments, and they're like, so whatever ended up happening, I realized that the story I was telling about myself just sounded very defeated, or that I was kind of embarrassed of who I became. And through my life coaching certification and working, through the tools that I teach with my community, is understanding that your story can be whatever you want, because it's your interpretation of who you believe you are and what you believe you represent in your life. And when you realize that your definition is solely up to you, and it doesn't have to be what's been passed down for generations or what historically society deems as normal or expected, then all of a sudden it's like this, golden, wall or this steel wall that's in front of you becomes this golden path of anything that you want to tell your story. So I think that it's really important to understand when you're talking about yourself and talking about your journey, the language that you're using, because that's going to really be how you're seeing yourself. I mean, it's just basically the mirror that what you tell people about yourself is how you see yourself. And realizing that what you believe is true about you, it doesn't matter if someone else believes it. It doesn't matter if you didn't used to believe that 3 years ago, but you're working on believing it now. But speaking it now from the version that you're looking to be is, to me, the most impactful way to really take that ownership of yourself and your story.
Well, and I think when you do that, it gives other women permission to do the same. I mean, you're providing a platform and a place for women to come and get, just be supported, be seen, be heard, gain tools, have a community so that they can live unapologetically, because we say there's so many things that we say sorry for. And so many times we keep talking about this, but when we, turns out we're not going to be a mom, we feel like we've got to, you talked about it earlier, you feel like you have to apologize for that. You don't have to apologize for that. You can just show up unapologetically just as you are. And so how you're doing that and giving women tools and helping them feel empowered to do that is so powerful. The importance of coming back to your why and your values and everything you do. You mentioned earlier, you started this partly because you didn't see, there wasn't resources out there for you. Once you were out of the medical space and done with trying all the things that you could try, all of a sudden there wasn't another option to go to be seen and heard. You felt supported in the medical space, but then that wasn't available anymore. And so just, and I think that has to be a lot of a part of just your why and your values, that I want to provide that for myself and for others. Would you say that's true, or what informed all of this?
Very much so, because like I mentioned earlier, I was always a very goal-driven person, very resourceful, able to figure things out, I wasn't used to feeling helpless. And this journey from the first day that, I went to see a reproductive endocrinologist, this feeling of helplessness loomed over me. And so when my journey ended after 7 years on and off of going through different medical treatments and interventions and clinics throughout the United States, there was no resources that were given to me. The last conversation with my clinic was, we don't recommend that you continue on with medical treatment. If you want to, do more, it's certainly up to you. But our medical, our medical advice would be to, cease in vitro fertilization, also known as IVF. But if you're interested in getting an egg donor or pursuing adoption, we can help you with those services. So you don't have to make that decision now. Think about it. Let us know. And we thought about it. And it was probably a couple month period where we went back and forth on whether those options were right for us.
Mm-hmm.
And when they weren't, there was no reason to call back.
Yes.
And also no one was calling to say, hey, we've been thinking about you, just wanted to check in. So I just was left to navigate it myself. And I remember just feeling so alone because my friends with kids, they were so supportive, and I feel super lucky that I had friends who were working through their own milestones, yet still made time for me, but it just didn't feel as authentic. The conversation, I felt like I needed to censor because I didn't want them to think that I wasn't happy for them or that I had jealousy towards what they were able to experience. And I didn't want them to feel like they had to downplay the joy that was in their life. So I found myself just reverting back to this person that I wouldn't even say reverting, but turning into this person that I didn't even really recognize. And that's when I decided, it was actually during the pandemic, I decided that I needed to change that narrative, and I needed to figure out a way to provide the support that I wasn't given. And come to find out, majority of women, I don't want to say all, but the majority of the women who I've come in contact with when I've asked about the support and the resources that they've been given, it's been nothing. And I realize, and this isn't to knock the medical community, I think that they do the best that they can, but then I start to believe like maybe there's no one like me available to them. And if they knew that there was somebody that could help their patients, because I'm sure that they stay up at night wondering, I wonder whatever happened to that beautiful couple. They wanted this so bad, or they tried so hard, or they had X amount of miscarriages. And I'm sure that as medical professionals that they would want to do more. So I decided I'll give them the opportunity to do more. So that's part of my next phase in my mission, is to get with the fertility clinics and let them know that there is someone now, and that they can continue to treat the whole patient instead of treatment, or communication ceasing when treatment ceases.
Yeah, I that's so powerful. And I think that's so important because of the just emotional trauma and also the physical trauma your body's been through as you're going, to walk away from there and not have resources, I think in so many ways is really dangerous for women if they start feeling like they have nowhere to turn, or even as couples, because there's a mourning period, I'm sure, for both sides. Like your partner, if you're partnered, is going through their own mourning period. And sometimes you got to have another resource. You got to have somebody that's been down this road, that's trained, that has supports in ways that they can show up for you, because, there are a lot of couples that don't survive these kinds of things because they can't take the grief. They wear each other out. How different would it be if when you're walking out that door, you're getting a pamphlet, you're getting information with websites and resources and community groups and support groups that you can go to next and access those resources. That's a game changer. And it's kind of mind-boggling with all the resources we have that there's not something set up for that automatically, because it's such an obvious need.
Yes. Well, and I'm living in that belief that maybe it just didn't exist. And because I know how the path was for me to be able to tell my story with the ease and with the grace that I tell it, and also feeling like proud of who I am. So I imagine that there's more women, and that's my mission, is to help more women follow that path and be able to tell their stories with pride and a desire for this greater existence and this greater living that they have available to them. Yeah. And I hope that that's what this will incite for other women.
Yes, yes, yes. Absolutely. So important. So, so, so important. Living out of your own expectations versus others. You talked about how, when you had done all you could do in vitro wise, they talked to you about, adoption, surrogacy, those kinds of things. And you and your partner, your husband, had to sort through whether that was for you or not. So talk to me about that process and just dealing with the expectations of not only people around you, but just kind of society. So many people just assume, well, why don't you just adopt? I mean, they don't really sit, because they've never had to sit and think about what that means and how personal of a decision that is, or, Sarah, whatever it is. And so talk to me about the expectations journey, because I think that is really powerful and how you've gotten to this space where you are.
I love that you brought up the adoption piece, because I would say of the comments and the things people say, that was probably the most, how do I say it? Like unnerving, annoying, heartless. At one point, I would think it was like a very heartless thing for people to say. And I'd love to rewind and tell you a little bit about the work that I've done. And maybe this can help someone who's listening, who's maybe working on managing that. Because commonly the conversation goes like this. You see someone, do you have kids? No, I don't. Oh, well, are you trying? Or how old are you? Or you'll get the, how long have you been married? So yeah, it's like people are doing the probing, right? So trying to figure out what's up with this person? Why don't they have kids yet? So I've gotten to a point where I'm able to more comfortably tell people, my husband and I went through IVF and we tried to become parents, but it didn't work out for us. And then you'll commonly get the hand on the chest and someone will lean in and they'll say, I'm so sorry. And there's this whisper. And I used to become so upset by that. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I figured out how to deal with this. Was I was realizing that when they said that they were so sorry, or if they followed with, well, you can always adopt, I would be like, well, maybe they didn't think I tried hard enough. Maybe they think that I was the worst case scenario, or maybe they worry that their daughter's going to end up like me, or somebody is going to end up like me. So I started to understand. And again, this was through life coaching skills and the tools. So this wasn't something that I was able to figure out when I was navigating this without help. Sure. I started to understand that I was believing that other people thought that I didn't want to be a bad mom enough, that I didn't want to be a mom bad enough, that I left options on the table, that if I really wanted to be a mom bad enough, that I would have pursued more, that I would have done something that wasn't in alignment with how I saw myself becoming a mom. Yeah. And I felt a lot of guilt also about choosing not to adopt and getting to a point where I'm able to talk about that openly. And there's still certain circumstances where I don't feel like I need to go into the whole intricacies of my decision process, but it's something that I try on for size quite often and practice different responses in different ways. And I think that's really how I've been able to come up with this story that I have created about myself and in my journey. But I think the adoption piece, a lot of people think that you just go to a supermarket and pick a number off, pull a number out and be like, okay, number 10, we've got a kid for you. Here we go. We're matching you up. There's a lot that goes into adoption, as it should. For some people, maybe there's more barriers than necessary, but I think also in recognition of making sure that the children that are being adopted are going to qualified homes that, are a safe place for them to be raised. I think that's paramount really in the adoption process. But I also think how selfish of me if I said yes to adoption and I didn't feel wholehearted about it. Yeah. Like why would I want to please society more by saying I was a mom through a route that I wasn't 100%, or my husband and I made decisions together about this, because that's not fair to that child. Exactly. And people don't think about that. They just think if you're a good person and there's these kids that need homes, that you should just be willing to do it. And trust me, I had a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of tears, and we prayed really hard over what decision was right for us when it came for adoption, decision to adopt or not. And I think a lot of people just don't realize that it's not a one size fits all answer. And what women are commonly grieving is the ability for the inability for their body to biologically reproduce. And even if you're saying yes to adoption or an egg donor, it's a great route for some women, but there's still this grief process that you're going through, that your body didn't do what genetically we are told our bodies are designed to do, and what differentiates us from being a male versus a female. And the grief part, I think, is really important. And I'm actually starting advanced grief certification because I didn't realize that I was grieving when I was going through it. I just thought people grieve when they lose someone dies, a parent, grandparent, pet, whatever. And I didn't realize that what I was grieving was valid too, because what I was grieving was a dream. And it was just this imagination of what I thought I was going to have. And so I didn't think I was considered somebody who was a grieving person. And I think that conversation needs to be told also, that your grief is valid, whether there's somebody 6 feet in the ground or, died in a car accident, whatever the case might be. Dreaming of something that will never come true for you the way that you envisioned it to be is something that's worthy of grief and services of like grief navigation. So that's why I'm getting an advanced certification in grief, because I want more tools in order to open that conversation up greater.
Yeah, that grief one, I think that's so important to talk about, because it's still a loss. Like, it's a loss of an ability to do something that you thought you were going to be able to do. It's a loss of a role that you thought you were going to have. It's a loss still. And we have to, I think we do this comparative thing with grief, and I call it, I weaponize, or I coined this term a couple of years ago, weaponized gratitude. And and I did a whole episode on it with my team. And it's like, people will say or think, and you've talked about several times, the number you did on yourself, that we as women do on ourselves about guilt and what people must think, and the thoughts and all the narratives going through. And we do this with, I didn't actually have a miscarriage or lose a baby or lose a child, or, I didn't go through that process and have this happen to me. So I can't be as sad as so-and-so. Why can't you? Why can't you? Why can't you allow yourself? Because but we do these things. We do this comparative and these narratives, and we need to give ourselves room to grieve whatever it is we need to grieve, and whatever that looks like. And we don't need anyone's permission to do it. We don't need anyone's blessing or anyone's, okay, it's our grief and only we know. And if you don't, it will come back to bite you later. It will show up in ways that aren't good, that aren't healthy. It will manifest itself in some other way. So really powerful. And I think just another important reminder of, these are very nuanced individual decisions. And it's important for people that haven't had this experience to not make assumptions about things, or to even how you respond. I literally, when you said the woman, the hand on the heart, I could see that in my head. I've literally seen these responses to women I know about these things. I'm like, oh my gosh. It's so out there, but it's also so interesting to me how much other people think it's okay to ask certain questions, or that they have a right to know things, or that they have a right to have an opinion about something that you've never been through, any kind of experience you've never had. And that's something we have to be better about too, just the empathy piece. And think about what you say. Think about what is, if it's appropriate or not, if it's supportive or not. Is it kind? Is it your business? So many of those things too. But yeah, I think that expectations piece is so powerful. Also, I want women to hear this conversations. And if they've been through a similar experience, know that one, there's help, but they can be, if they're feeling like they want to be a resource to help others, because Lana Manikowski cannot cover every woman in America or in the world. So also know and being encouraged that there's ways that you can go about doing that. Do you want to talk about that a minute and your route that you took to get to where you are being enabled to do this?
Becoming a certified coach and such?
Yeah.
I'd love to. So one of the things that's a common side effect, and I think a lot of people don't talk about that either, is weight gain when you're going through medicated reproductive assistance. It's a lot of hormones, a lot of emotion, a lot of weight gain that comes along with the medications. And through my journey, I gained a significant amount of weight. And when we came to the end of the road where we knew that we weren't going to become biological parents, I noticed that I clung to that weight. I quit caring for my body. I quit being active, physically, going to workout classes, things like that. And I started to feel like not only did my body not do what I thought it was designed to do, it didn't look like it used to look like. And there was just this desire that I had to feel like I was connected to this body of mine in some way. And so I did Weight Watchers multiple times, and I was really good at like measuring my food, counting my points, getting to my goal weight. And then the minute I got to my goal weight, back to where I was. And then this woman, I started listening to her podcast when I'd be driving, and she would talk about these things that seemed so, what's the right way? Like, not gimmicky. It wasn't like Whole30, starve yourself, only or no carbs, blah, 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 blah. She was just talking more about how food plays a role in your life and not restricting yourself from what you want to eat, but just understanding why you're eating it when you're eating it. Or if you're not hungry anymore, why you feel like you need to clean a plate and not throw away a scoop of rice, like all these things that, we're conditioned to believe are bad with food waste, et cetera, at your expense, right? You don't want to waste food because that's a bad thing. So you'd rather put it on this body of yours. So a long way to say, I joined her membership. She was a weight loss coach. Turned out to be, she was a life coach. I knew nothing about life coaching. Probably, I would say if I heard about life coaching earlier in life, I would have been like, oh, that's kind of wonky because like, who's going to tell me what's better for my life than me? Not knowing that what life coaches really do are help guide you to where you want to go and not give you their pathway, right? It's to understand your desired pathway and help you create the steps for yourself. So I heard her one time mention that she was a certified life coach. And then I got on, of course, Google to find out. And I signed up for my life coach certification during the pandemic. It was sort of the first time that things quieted down. I also had lost probably about 25 pounds using the natural methods in which she taught me, which was all life coaching related methods. And I became a certified life coach in 2021. Okay. And that's really where my path began. So it was this side effect of fertility treatments, of gaining weight, feeling unconnected or disconnected from my body, that got me to this point where I'm so grateful I went through that, because I don't think I would have ever gotten to where I am today.
Sure. Now, for your life coaching, is it specifically for women who have gone through infertility, or do you take these practices and apply it to your specific area?
So it's a year-long certification in general life coaching. Okay. And so the type of coaching that I'm trained to do is called causal coaching. So understand the cause of why you're believing or feeling the way you do, or why you're doing certain things that are not in alignment with who you desire to be. And then I've done further studies around fertility, and then adding on the grief certification. So yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm certified. I could basically coach anyone on anything, but I really want to support the infertility community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's clearly a need. Thank you for that. That was kind of a segue, but I thought it was important if women are listening and they're like, well, I think I'm to a point in my journey where I'd like to do that. I thought it was important to share because it's a pretty specific niche, and I want people to have those resources. And don't worry, resources will be available to you on our website when this episode drops if you have further questions. But thank you for sharing that. And this goes really nicely into accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. That's, and that's really complex. in everyone's life, and specifically when you've gone through something and life threw you a curveball that you were not ready for, that just no one prepared you for. No one prepares you for infertility. No one. I mean, it's just, and that's something we talked about this earlier, and I'm going to beat that drum again. We've got to start talking to people about this early on so they know it's a possibility, have discussions around it, have be support, all those types of things. So you get this curveball and you're like, okay, how do I get comfortable with these layers and these parts of my life? It doesn't mean you have to love them, but just that acceptance of that and working through that, because I think you've got to be able to accept your layers before you can see your value. And you've clearly done that work. You can tell by just the conversation we've had today. So talk to me about your layers journey.
What I wasn't aware of is what I wanted to be. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I didn't know. And when I say wanted to be, I mean the feelings of liberation from captivity of not being a mom. And when I think about like the layers of me and this path that I've taken, it all started with noticing how I didn't feel connected to myself anymore. Someone who was seemingly high function for most of her life, somebody who was used to being successful at things in my career place, financially, emotionally, connected to myself. So really it started with me understanding that I didn't want to feel this way anymore. And a lot of people think if they wait long enough, like these things will just like stop feeling hard and that you'll figure out a way to navigate. But I knew that there had to be more for me because I didn't want to spend the next 40 years of my life dreading what my life was going to end up looking like. Because for so long, I associated what I was going to do in my future with the milestones of being a mom. I thought about sending kids to school and to prom and college and marriage and grandmotherhood and, all these things. So I had no clue how I was going to fill my life with anything that felt meaningful because I wasn't prepared to have to make decisions like that.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think the first layer was recognizing that the way I was feeling wasn't who I wanted to be. And it wasn't like relatable to me. And it wasn't something that I aspired to be. And then understanding that asking for help is okay, that I don't have to navigate this alone. Yeah. Because for so much of our lives, I think that we, especially as women, are just expected to figure things out and, be given this, pile of laundry and have it sorted and folded and blah, blah, blah. I'm giving the laundry scenario to represent so many different things in our lives. Like, here's this pile, put it together and make it look pretty. And we accept that as our role, I think, oftentimes as women. And so knowing that I couldn't do that alone and not judging myself, that I needed some help along the way. Yeah. And I think that's probably the thing that most of us fear is saying that we're needing help or needing some guidance in some sort and that we don't have it all figured out. Yeah. So that is probably one of the biggest layers, especially as somebody who was very goal driven. Like I'm sure I needed help at some point in my life. So why was trying to figure out how to love my life again or be excited about my future something that felt embarrassing to say you needed help with? Just like a lot of people are embarrassed to say they see a therapist. Yeah. I think it's amazing, that somebody cares enough about what they're developing into or how they're showing up in their life that they can say, I need this help. So I think, that's a really important part of the layer. And then actually taking the tools and seeing something happen with them. And I think that's really where that change goes from, oh my gosh, this is going to be a heavy lift to, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it could be this easy. Like nobody told me these things I could incorporate in my life. And it was up to me to just like decide I wanted to do it. And then the minute I started doing it, things felt so much easier. So I think it's understanding that it doesn't have to take a lot of hard work. I think a lot of people shy away from creating this life that feels easier to them or more abundant because they think it's going to be a ton of work. And you hear people say, oh, I worked so hard on myself. Like, I did work, yeah, but once I started seeing the results of what I was learning and what I teach now in my community, I was like, well, hell, if that was that easy, what else is available to me? And that's where I go on and continue to amaze myself by the things that I've decided to do and create, and the things that I know are still waiting for me, because it's so much easier than people think. Everyone thinks, oh, that's going to be so hard. Like, I don't know if I'm ready to invest this time, or, oh my gosh, it costs this much money to work with a life coach. Like, I don't know if and it's like, girl, you are number one. Like, let's get this going. What are we wasting time for?
Yeah, I love you said that. You're spending that money somewhere else. So why not invest it in you? And also, but it is about how, you got to a point where you wanted better. It is about the approach that you go into it. You went into it, and I think when you start seeing results and you start feeling better, whatever work it is you're doing on yourself, whatever healing, all of a sudden you're like, that weight gets lifted off. You're like, ooh, that feels good. And there's
like,
wait a minute. Exactly. And I talk about this a lot. We are capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit for, one. And you're worth in the investing. And also, it is so much better on the other side when you've made the investment. I mean, it is so freeing. It is so, and then it just becomes, okay, what else can I learn? What else can I peel back? What else can I, move through? What else can I unpack to continue to grow and evolve into the person I'm designed to be? I think there's a lot of narratives around that. But yeah, we have to quit being afraid to ask for help. We have to, and that's why I have these conversations. Let's create community. Let's create resources. Let's do this together. We need each other, and that's okay. That's a good thing. I think there's this belief that we've got to be independent, strong. You can be independent and strong in community. You can still we are wired to be, communal people. And we as women change these narratives and get these conversations going by reaching out for help, by taking each other's hand, by lifting each other up. So yeah, we got to also just dispel those myths around that, that it's bad to ask for help or there's some kind of shame in it. That is not true. That is not true. And if someone's saying that to you, that is out of their own journey, their own hurt, their own insecurity, their own inaccurate narratives. And so again, going back to what the expectations and thoughts that are and aren't true, you are worth it. You are worth the investment. And yeah, so thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Talk to me about as living out feels, finding empowerment, embracing layers, which you do. This is what you've done in your life, in these choices you've made, in these paths that you've gone down in your journey. How has this affected the quality of relationship with yourself as well as with others?
Well, it's one of the 4 pillars in the coaching program that I have in Thrive After Infertility is relationships. Because not only your relationship with yourself, where we've spent a lot of time talking about like the disappointment, the shame, all that. We touched on the relationship with your partner and how some people don't make it through this. And, if you feel disconnected from your partner, are you looking back and being like, well, we kind of liked each other, but I figured we'd have kids and that would sort of diffuse the next X amount of years of our life. And, I could tolerate that person because there was a buffer zone of some sort.
Yes.
So understanding how to feel reconnected with that person that you chose to marry or become committed to, or, regardless of, what that relationship looks like or the parameters around it. Also, to your family and friends. And, at the age where your friends might be getting pregnant, or a sibling or a cousin or somebody really close to you, and there seems to be this rift of relationship. And then also, I think in the workplace too, if you work in an environment where there's a lot of moms and they get to leave at 3:00 because they've got to pick someone up for an orthodontist appointment, or they have, this going on, and then you're stuck there at 6 muddling through, trying to get stuff done because, what's your reason for leaving early? So there's sometimes is a lot of dissension that people feel with their work colleagues that people don't talk about, because they feel like because they don't have kids, they should be the ones volunteering for the conferences on the weekends or the late night projects that need to go on. So relationships is a huge part of what I teach in my Thrive After Infertility community, because there's a lot of complexities that go along with it. And recognizing that what is important to you is and should be respected by you enough that you advocate for yourself. And if you have a dog that goes to daycare and the daycare calls and your dog is, sick and needs to go to the vet, even if your manager doesn't think that's important, if you do, you're entitled to believe that that's something that's a priority to you. And because whether it's a human or a canine, those things to you emotionally are an attachment to you that I think you should advocate for yourself, but also understanding the communication aspect of it, and that saying no to things like baby showers or, a birth announcement, or how people communicate with you when they're pregnant and they don't know how to tell you. And that they're not a bad friend. Maybe they just don't know the right language, and you might hear about it from somebody else and be like, I can't believe Sue wouldn't tell me she was having a kid. I thought we were good friends. And then this whole narrative that starts. So understanding that a lot of it is about communication and picking up the phone and saying, I heard you're pregnant, and I want to tell you, we might not talk about it, or I might not be able to talk about it much, and it has nothing to do with you, but I'm working through a lot of stuff right now for myself. And I just want to tell you, I love you, and I'm glad you get to experience this. So having language that feels authentic to you, and not feeling like you need to show up at Joey's first birthday party and go in the bathroom and cry, but understanding maybe you're just going to drop off a gift and say, I can't stay, but I wanted to bring a gift. Or maybe you make a commitment to yourself and say, I'm going to stay through the games at the baby shower, and after the games, I'm going to go. So understanding that there's a process in which you can form relationships or reincorporate these relationships, or what that looks like. And it doesn't always have to look like it used to look. And I think a lot of us remember these friends from college that we were besties with, and now they're moms and their priorities are different, feeling like, our relationship isn't what it used to be. But what if it wasn't meant to be what it used to be?
Yeah.
What if there's, what if there's a path that maybe is going to lead you to different relationships that feel more in alignment with who you are now? And that's what's really motivated me to start the Others Day brunch, which I don't know if we'll have time to get into that, but that's the day before Mother's Day. I host a brunch in person in Chicago, and it's for women who aren't moms or have, some feelings of disconnection around Mother's Day, that they can come together in person, meet new people, and form new relationships with people that they don't feel like they have to apologize for how they're feeling or talk about things. And I think the relationships aspect, it's really multifaceted. And I feel really proud of the work and the awareness that I bring in the community about that.
I love the Others Day brunch. I think that is absolutely beautiful. That's brilliant, actually. We did an episode in our second season, I think it was, about the nuances of Mother's and Father's Day, because on the surface, everybody assumes that's just a happy day for people. But that is a complex day. And there's a lot of narratives around it. And infertility is one of the narratives around it. So that's so cool that you've come up with that resource. I'm so glad you brought up the relationships piece, because I think that can get really kind of interesting. All of a sudden these expectations are unspokenly imposed on you as a woman because you don't have children, based on you should take it like your time's not valuable or your time isn't as important because of that. So you should take all these other assignments. I think that happens all the time. And I think and it's kind of an unspoken, but it's obvious, it's there. And so we got to change the attitudes and opinions about that too, or even work assignments they should take, who travels more, all that stuff weighs in, and you need to feel empowered to speak on behalf of yourself and your life and the value it has. And it's not, the work decisions should not be based upon that. That's not those, other people that are moms. They knew that I was a working mom. I understood going in. That's a choice I made, to be a mom and to work. And there were decisions and things that I was going to have to figure out and work around. And it was not my work's responsibility to navigate that for me. So I think that's really important. I also think in families, it can get complicated when there are, siblings that have children versus siblings that don't. There's an expectation, I think, put upon the sibling or couple that doesn't have children, that they can be more flexible with their travel, that they're always going to be expected to do X, Y, and Z because they don't have kids. And I think that can get really complicated too, and shouldn't be just assumed. So we could talk about that all day, but any other thoughts you want to add to that before we get to our rapid fire?
Well, I think we covered off on a lot of it, but there's a lot more complexities to relationships than I think we realize going into the journey, or when we get to the end of this road and you're the only one of your friend group when you guys go out for a girls' night and everyone's talking about what their kids are doing. Yeah. For me, just last weekend, we were at a party at my best friend's house, and she has 3 kids. And I noticed, my husband, it was like the sweetest moment. And this is one of the reasons why I love him so much. Like, he asked her, he's like, so like, how old are your kids now? And she said the ages. And he's like, so like, what do 4-year-olds do? And she looked at him like so surprised, but he was like genuinely interested.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know. Like, and she was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, like, are they riding bikes? Are they riding, like, what do 4-year-olds do? We don't have a reference point. And I was like, I looked at him so admiringly, because I was like, how sweet that he cares, even though we don't have kids, like the fact that he's interested in learning more about what it's like to be a parent. And hopefully people find that same interest in us, and because we have an interesting story to tell too. So absolutely. I just want to kind of add that of the fact that a lot of people think just because you don't have kids that you've got to end your friendships. But, if it doesn't feel right to you, absolutely, back to that boundaries thing we talked about earlier. But for me, instead of looking at my friends of having something that I don't have or that I wanted, understanding like we're all different people. It's just kind of makes up the whole melting pot of, why we have our own story and what we're all independently doing. And maybe you outgrow friendships, and maybe there's new groups that you want to meet, but you don't have to just X people out of your life because you're the only one who doesn't have kids.
I love that. Thank you for that. I think that's really informative and really important to remember. And also that, you might not have children, but you said this earlier, there's things that you and your husband have in their life that they don't have. So it's all about the nuance. We are down to our rapid fire. I named 5 activities that nourish you.
Oh, 5 activities that nourish me. Oh God, I feel like I should be able to rapid fire them off. 5 activities that nourish me. Walking my dog. I love flower arranging. I love listening to podcasts. Nourish me is quiet time, just being quiet with nothing going around. And I think, is this 4 or 5? I'm going to say for my 5th one, it would be connecting with my community.
I love that. Oh, good. All right. And 5
you got to count them out.
I know. I'll do it. I'll get them out. I know we have this happen all the time. They're like, how many? I'm like, however many you want. I know I said 5, but if we do 3 or 10, that's fine. 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
Desirous, Eager, fulfilled, accessible,
One more.
and connected.
I like that. I like accessible. That's a good one. I really like that. There's a lot of nuance to that. Lana, thank you so much. This has been such a good, enriching, important conversation. I am so glad you reached out to me. I appreciate and have so much deep respect for the work you do, your willingness to share your journey, your willingness to be a resource to women. We don't have enough of these resources, and I'm so thankful that you felt compelled to step up and be one. That takes a lot of strength. That takes a lot of just value and inner knowing within you to put yourself in that position. So thank you for what you do, your vulnerability, your authenticity. It is so important. And just women, be grounded in your value. Name those character traits, know who you are. Don't believe these narratives that we hear. I think the reason I feel so passionately about it is I grew up in an environment with a religion where children were expected, and lots of them were expected. And I saw so many women put their bodies through so much, I'll say it, torture and unhealthiness to try to meet this narrative. And the loneliness and depression that was felt when they weren't able to meet this expectation. And it was horrible. And I raised 3 daughters, and I told every single one of them, you get to decide your path, if you want to be a mom. And if it doesn't work out for whether it's medical reasons or choice, that has nothing to do with your value. And it is, you get to live the life you were created to live as a woman, and motherhood it doesn't have take away or add to your value. It just becomes something that may or may not be a part of your life. And so I think that's why I was like, I need to dive into that trigger. I really got fired up today, but it's so important to me.
That, Thanks for being that example to your daughters and to your listeners, because we don't hear that often.
No, we don't. And we
needs to be told.
It does. And we have we have one daughter who's decided, she's married, they're coupled, and they've decided not to have children. And and my second one who's does want to have kids someday, and she's got a partner, they'll probably end up having children together someday. She's like, thank you for never expecting that of us. Thank you for never putting that pressure on us. Thank you for because there's a lot of things I didn't do right. But the one thing I was very vocal with them from day one is that their value did not rise or fall around whether they, motherhood worked out for them, whether that was choice or not. So women, you are valuable. You are valuable as you are, and you're worth the investment, and don't let anyone tell you different. But Lana, thank you so much again for your time. Women, feel empowered, feel known, feel heard. Know these resources are there available for you or a friend or a loved one at embracinglayers.com. They'll all be there as we drop this episode and promote this episode. But thanks so much again. Lana, do you want to share your website real quick and all that?
Sure.
Like I said, it's neat on the website, but let's know.
Yeah, LanaManikowski.com. So you'll probably have to look up the spelling on that. And then on Instagram at Lana.Manikowski.
Okay.
And on YouTube, awesome. Lana.Manikowski also.
Okay, great. All right. Thanks so much, audience. Thanks again to Lana for being with us this week. Take good care of yourselves. Remember how valuable you are, and have a great week.